Good morning, Adrienne.
Good morning, Emma.
How's it going today?
It's good. I'm in the office.
In office, indeed. And here we are for another episode of Sidebar with Nelligan Law, talking about return to office.
Mm-hmm.
A hot topic of conversation these days, especially
Definitely.
in Ontario and certainly here in Ottawa. I know we both have lots of friends and close ones that are being brought back into office. In Ottawa, federal public servants in July came back 4 days a week, and public servants in Ontario broadly, some of them are even back 5 days a week. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I can certainly understand why people are frustrated. It's hard not to look at some of the efficiencies of flexible arrangements and be, you know, confused about why the government is taking this stance. Um, that said, it's good to be able to chat with people about their choices. It really does depend on what type of workplace they're in. If they are in the federal public service, or if they're in a non-unionized
Mm-hmm.
workplace, obviously that changes a lot. So hopefully, we are going to be moving towards eventually workplaces that can be more accommodating to people's personal preferences, but we'll see.
Yeah, fair enough. I think that's like many things, it's a lot of we'll just kind of have to wait and see. And I think we're
Yeah.
really, we see this tension between like management and management rights and then what the employer preferences and how they work better and probably honestly are doing better work. But
Hmm.
those things are obviously coming to a head. So that's our topic today.
Hmm.
We're both employment lawyers. We
Hmm.
work with unionized and non-union clients. So I think we should touch on both of those. Do you want to start with the unionized workplaces?
Sure. So if you're in a unionized workplace, your rights are going to be quite a bit different, and there's different frameworks that apply. So from a return to office perspective, being in a union is going to be helpful because your union is going to be, uh, negotiating and advocating on behalf of everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And almost all unions, I would say, are advocating for flexible uh, work arrangements. So there's quite a few policy grievances, also, unfair labor complaints that have been filed with respect to the return to office policies that we're seeing.
Yeah.
So if you're in a union, your management does still have rights. So again, that, like you said, that's where this tension comes in. But your union is going to be able to, either help you individually if you have specific reasons that make it particularly important for you to work from home. And they're also going to do that broad advocacy.
Yeah. And what's your advice to people in a union that are saying, I'm being brought back to work. This isn't working for me. Like what's your advice for them?
I think I would ask them, why is it that it's not working for you? What is the barrier? And is it connected to something that's going to be protected under human rights legislation? So the two most common ones that we see typically are disability and family status. So if you do have a disability that requires some accommodation and working remote or having a more flexible schedule helps that, then that is something that your union, if you're in a unionized environment, your union can help you with. And even if you're in a non-unionized environment, you have a right to be accommodated up to the point of undue hardship of the employer. And, just because there's a broad mandate doesn't mean that it's going to apply specifically to you. So you do have to have a protected ground in order to, get access to leverage via a human rights um, legislation. But a lot of people do. A lot of people need accommodation for whatever reason. And then if you're in that situation, talk to your union, talk to a lawyer, and likely you're going to have to talk to your doctor,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the case of disability, because you will need evidence to show that this is, something that you need.
Yeah, it's not enough to just sort of claim it. Like often you need to sort of really show this
Exactly.
is why. And, in some cases, like we're not saying that you have to self accommodate, but there is sort of a step that you need to take to sort of be like looking at some different options and being open
Hmm.
to different options is the reality of it too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And human rights obviously apply in all contexts, right? So
Hmm.
this is for unionized workers. They might be able to go to their union. Non unionized workers, that's what we're saying. Call an employment lawyer, talk to someone and also talk to your employer, right?
Yeah.
Like bring it up with them, try and resolve it
Mhm.
informally. Of course, sometimes that's not going to be an option for
Mhm.
whatever it is, but those informal conversations go a long way in trying to resolve things.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, in a perfect world, and I think a lot of employers are trying their best to abide by their obligations under whether it be human rights legislation or occupational health and safety legislation. So there you can go in assuming good faith from your employer and starting those informal conversations. If things aren't going well, if you don't feel you're being heard, if your medical um, information, well, first of all, you have a right to privacy around your
Yeah, of
medical
course.
information, but if your requests aren't being taken seriously, then that's when you might want to loop in an employment lawyer.
Yeah, fair enough. So what about for employees who, it's not a human rights issue. It's not something that has to do with a protected ground, but they're just saying like, "Hey, listen, I work better at home. It's more flexibility for me. I've really enjoyed this arrangement." What can they do or if anything?
Yeah, so it's going to depend on the circumstances. For some employees, they might not have a lot of recourse
Mhm.
other than looking for new work.
Yeah.
Um, it always depends. If you've been working remote though for a long time, including pre-pandemic, then you're going to have more like a stronger position to say no. This is actually a fundamental term of my employment,
Yeah.
and if you change this, that's a huge problem for me, and you'll have a stronger legal position. If you've been kind of flexible since COVID, I think the courts are going to be a lot more sympathetic to employers who had to respond to a pandemic.
And I think
Yeah.
that's it. I think it's really looking to the contract and what's a term of your
Yeah.
contract, and it doesn't have to be written in it, right? We can
Mhm.
have sort of implied terms, but it's really like, is this a fundamental piece of my contract, or is this something that was your employer responding to,
Mhm.
we're all in a tough situation, we'll work from home from now, but people that have sort of pre-pandemic remote, or you signed a contract post-pandemic that allowed for that
Mhm.
flexibility and now they're changing it, I think that could
Yeah.
also be a different conversation, right? We're kind of, post 2022, 2023, and people have signed these remote contracts
Mhm.
and now they're being asked to come back. I think that is something certainly to look to. So like as an employment lawyer, the first thing I'm looking to is the contract,
Yeah.
both what's written there and also like what else is going on around there and the policies that are there. This brings to mind this case in BC, a BC Court of Appeal case where, there was no sort of express contract term, but the Court of Appeal found that because it was something that she had relied on both pre-pandemic for her childcare obligations and this sort of flexibility that she needed to work from home, she was then sort of found to be constructively dismissed and as a result was awarded sort of significant damages when they brought her back into the office.
Mhm.
So, constructive dismissal, I think that's kind of a hot topic. You and I both hear a
Mhm.
lot about it. Do you want to maybe give me a rundown of what constructive dismissal is just broadly?
Sure. So constructive dismissal, um, it's yeah, it's something that a lot of people have heard about. They come chat with us. Um, Essentially, it's when there's been a breakdown in the employment relationship. And so a term or condition of employment has been violated allegedly by the employer, which then forces the employee to quit. So they simply cannot, work now that there has been this breakdown.
Yeah. I always think of the like, you can't fire me, I quit
Yeah.
kind of line, right? Where it's
Yeah.
like, it's just you can't be there. And it's quite a high standard.
Exactly. And that's where there's a lot of misunderstanding
Hmm.
um, from, I think people in the public where, if let's say the contract, your written employment contract says that the employer, reserves the right to bring you in office full time, and you've only been there a couple years, and there's been kind of different policies. If they now move to a fully in office requirement, likely that's not going to be enough for a constructive dismissal. Um, but again, as you said in this BC case, because of the particular circumstances of that case, including the fact that she had been remote for so long, in that case, it was enough to make out constructive dismissal. So
I hate to be the lawyer that's always like, it depends,
yeah,
but like, it always kind of depends on the
it
facts
always
of your case.
depends. Yeah,
Yeah.
there is. Exactly. So it's tricky. Like people come to us worried about
Mhm.
constructive dismissal, and they don't. Sometimes it's a harsh reality that management does have power to make certain choices.
Yeah. And I think, I always encourage my clients to think about constructive dismissal, it's the end of your employment,
Yeah.
right? Like some people come thinking like, oh, I can sort of claim this and keep working there, but like it's quite a harsh step. And I always want people to be thinking about like, am I ready
Yeah.
to sort of leave this employment behind? Because that's, what you're really asking of
Yeah.
it. And so that's always just sort of, is this something that maybe you can live with at least until you can sort of find your own job, because
Yeah.
taking that constructive dismissal step is pretty huge.
Yeah.
What about, people who just say this isn't working for me and say I'm going to keep working from home? Any thoughts on that?
Um, well, if you're in a union, typically what we say is obey now, grieve later.
Mhm.
So a decision maker is, not really going to look kindly typically unless something's like unsafe. Or again, if you had like medical evidence
Yeah.
supporting your decision, like again, there's always, this is always subject to individual circumstances, but typically like if there's an employer rule, you have to follow it or you're leaving yourself open to discipline, or even termination, depending on the circumstances. Uh, and then after that, like you obey and then you grieve.
Mhm.
So, and then you just go through the grievance process. If you're in a non unionized workplace, you can be terminated at any time as long as it is not discriminatory and as long as they give you enough notice. So, you can if a client
Yeah.
came to me and they
You can
said,
do
"I'm
what
just
you
gonna
want,
stay at
but
home," I would say, "Yeah, that's
yeah.
it's your life, but you are risking unless we can credibly argue that this is linked to a protected ground,
Mhm.
so a ground that's protected in human rights legislation."
So there we're thinking like disability,
Yeah,
family status, so
yeah,
both childcare and elder care. Those are kind of like the key ones we see.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so unless we can make a link to that, if you just choose to ignore your employer, you're risking
Yeah.
being terminated.
And we don't want to see people ending up in sort of a termination for cause situation.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's always a risky one for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
It's
you don't like it's the reality is that you do have less power than your employer.
mhm.
And so that is something that like we always try to give people some power back, at least like in to have informed decision making about the risks.
Yeah.
But um
Yeah, it's sort of assessing your situation,
mhm,
deciding what you can and can't live with, because for some people it's just not going to work,
yeah.
and then deciding, is it this place of employment that I need to sort of
Hmm.
stay in and figure it out? Or for some people, right, like maybe that's not the right spot for you. And I'm not making light of sort of leaving your employment and what the realities of that is.
Hmm.
But sometimes it's a rock and you're between a rock and a
Yeah,
hard place, and that's a decision that has to be made.
exactly.
Yeah. Anything else that you can think of that people who are sort of facing this return to office need to think of?
Um, I think that in terms of, if you do have concerns with how things are playing out, if you think some people are being given different treatment than
Mhm.
others, if you're in a union, always you can reach out to your labor relations officer, or just the general information line for the union, and they can kind of give you some guidance, talk about, when and if a grievance might be appropriate. Um, and, just from a public advocacy, if you are concerned about it, you can always reach out to your MPs. You can, you know,
Yeah, let
publicly
people know
support.
that you're
Yeah,
not happy
exactly.
about it, right? Like for
Hmm.
some people it's really not working to come into the office every
Yeah,
day, and other people are fine with it, but there's
yeah,
always power in sort of saying that
yeah,
you're not pardon me,
exactly.
it's not working.
Yeah.
Yeah. And what about when is the right time to come give you a call?
I think, if you're really struggling with the return to office, for whatever reason, then you might want to come chat with someone because we can sometimes help negotiate exits. Constructive dismissals are risky, but sometimes there's steps we can take before taking that more formal step to try to see if there's a way to mutually separate. um, and we can guide you on things like should you be talking to your doctor Is this partly difficult for you because of other issues in the workplace? Is there harassment? Is this a toxic workplace? Um, is there discrimination going on? How can we, connect you with the resources you might need? So care providers or, perhaps a short-term leave is needed. So um, I think that, it's never a bad idea, to see a lawyer. If there's not much to be done, then um, that's
Yeah, at least you know,
at
right?
least
And I think there's a lot of
exactly.
power in sort of having
Yeah.
that information to sort of talk through with someone who knows sort
Mhm.
of the scene, gets the sort of legal landscape, and can listen to you and say, how does that apply to your situation?
Yeah.
Because that's really the key, right? Is figuring out how all of
Yeah.
this applies to what you're living.
Totally, because sometimes people don't, they come to me and they have all this stuff that's happening to them, and they might be focusing on, one part, but in the course of the conversation, I'm able to say, well, actually, this part is, raises, some discrimination issues for me. And this is where I see this, like with them, making this comment about you rushing home to pick up your kids and in the context of this, and you know what I mean? So sometimes people don't fully see or clearly see their issues the same way that a third party
Hmm.
lawyer who's more familiar with, the various pieces of legislation might see things.
Yeah, I think that's think that's fair. And
Yeah.
I think I'm losing my words, so maybe that's a good time to call it a wrap.
Perfect.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrienne.
Thanks, Emma.